And then I'm going back to the city working at the for 2 weeks during the city fair, I think in 2024. But I have a grant with 2 people on the team there. That's going for 2 weeks. I will be going a little bit. Yeah. But I really like it. I really like it. I don't want to cut it.
So
I'm currently trying to teach myself how to make it.
share my view. Sorry, I'm trying to screen recording.
Are you both ready to go?
I'm just trying to set it up so that it can actually, so I can share the screen. It's run into some, although I got it set to be able to share.
Yeah.
It is for some reason
Allow Zoom.
grant access. Yes, security and privacy. I gave you access for screen recording. Surely it's the screen recording you need access to.
I think it's also
Something else.
Isn't it security or something? Or
Well, we're in security and privacy.
I know he does workshops with
Camera. Zoom's got it. Microphone. Zoom's got it.
accessibility. Just go to there.
It's not asking for it there.
What else is there?
I know
Screen
exactly.
recording.
Well, that's the one I was in.
It's allowed.
Yeah.
That's all right.
It's weird.
Really.
Okay, let me
You might have to quit Zoom and reopen it.
all
Sorry.
right, let's do that.
Yeah.
I will. He's got to do it.
Believe me.
we're doing since I have no idea.
And then, okay, all right, okay.
Super.
So let's do that. So hopefully that sharing. Oh yeah, I have to actually do that. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, you can only watch our thing on
Gather
Zoom,
round.
yeah?
Yes, that's right.
You have to be on Zoom.
We're doing a campfire. Okay.
There
we go.
All right. Okay. All right. All right. All
So
right.
can you actually see? I just really hope that this one is the one for.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Can,
If I go into presentation, will it actually follow? That's the question.
rehearse.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
super.
Wow.
I'll just get rid of that.
Never seen such a bent display. What do you want to see? Huh?
Yeah, no, I see that I can read the text.
Ah, great. Yes, we've got the.
So. No, we're
Okay.
really nice
Thank you everyone for your patience and welcome to this SensiLab Forum. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the unceded lands of the traditional owners of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also to acknowledge any members of the Indigenous community who are either online or with us today. It's a great pleasure to welcome Rob and Petra to SensiLab. They're visiting from Europe, where you're based most of the time, or
I'm in Melbourne, actually.
Oh, you're in Melbourne?
Yes, that's
Okay.
why I said it's so hilarious that we haven't
Yeah.
connected yet. The delayed because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But technically here since 2020, technically.
Yeah. Okay, well,
Sorry.
apologies for that, but
Yeah.
you have been based in Europe for a lot of your illustrious career. Some of it, at least.
Well, yeah, some of yours. Most of mine has been in Australia, and now I'm in Europe.
Okay.
So that's the confusion. Is that
Sorry.
yes, we're managing to.
We've done
Global
this thing.
citizens. shall we
Yes.
say.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And I've known Rob Petra for many years, and have always been so impressed by their work, both on an artistic and creative level and a technical level. They're one of the few groups of artists in the world, I think, who really managed to integrate those two things in such a very refined and interesting way. So it's a great pleasure to have them give a talk. Without any further ado, I'll hand it over to both of you, and please make them welcome to the SensiLab, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
That's a wow, what a lovely introduction. We've put this together in John said, come along and give a talk, and we hadn't really prepared, and we've been busy working on some robots that you'll see later on. So this might be a bit casual. Forgive us if we lose our track as we go along, but hopefully it will still be interesting. We're going to talk about sort of our journey over the past. Oh God, I don't want to.
2010.
Since
Actually,
2010.
we're covering.
I just noticed on the Zoom sharing your presenter view, not the.
I thought that might be the case. So how do I? Yeah. Okay. So if I do, do I need to do the PowerPoint in a presenter window rather than onto full screen?
I just did the one before not working, but I just said presentation.
Maybe you
All right,
can share
okay.
different screen.
New share, but I can't share
This one, isn't that's the one.
desktop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then do and I am good at computers, I promise. Does that actually share the desktop?
Super.
Okay, we've got a green border around it. That tells us that's the green border of success. Yes. Okay.
Lifeless.
All right. So that's the screensaver. Okay. Good with computers. Good with computers. Okay. So a little bit of a journey since 2010 of sort of a little bit of where I'm coming from, a bit of where Petra's coming from. I came from sort of creative AI or computational creativity, and together we've been working on artworks, in particular on creative robotics, and most recently in performance making, which Petra will talk mostly about. But I'll start off by a little bit of the journey of why I got interested in computational creativity and creative AI, and then how we work together on some explorations of creative robotics, and then finishing up with our current practice, our current work. If I start with a little bit of the background, I mean, I guess all I wanted to do with this slide was just to point out that the idea of AI and creativity goes right back to the beginning. So this is a picture from the Dartmouth conference. This is the sort of birth of artificial intelligence as a term, and within their sort of grand challenges that they were going to tackle over the summer was the idea of developing a creative AI, and John McCarthy said in the proposal for the grand challenge that creative AI, he had the proposal that a fairly attractive yet clearly incomplete conjecture is that the difference between creative thinking and unimaginative competent thinking lies in the injection of some randomness. And that understanding of the difference between sort of regular reasoning and creativity persists probably to this day, but was very strong for a long time in the development of computational systems. And there was a lot of systems developed, both sort of knowledge-based systems, and then later on sort of genetic algorithms, which is the classic version of adding some randomness to a process. But what interested me when I got into this was actually things that weren't really directly in the algorithm. I was interested in two things, and they're sort of summarized by, or initially interested in two things, they were summarized by two figures, which if you've ever read one of my papers, you'll know it's one of my papers, even if it's blind reviewed, because it'll have these figures in. One is the Wundt curve, which is all about motivation. It's all about what what's interesting in the world. And one of the things that Berline wrote about when he talked about curiosity is this idea of a Wundt curve, which is that there are the things that we find most interesting are things that are similar but different from those things we've experienced before. And so that drove me to develop a whole bunch of research around curious agents and that would search and explore spaces just simply to get this hedonic reward rather than to achieve a goal. So I was less interested in the algorithm and more interested in what was providing the rewards for the algorithm. And then the other figure that I put in many papers is the domain interaction field, the domain individual interaction field interaction, or DIFI model, which is from a systems view of creativity. That creativity isn't like this sort of romantic view of a single lone individual. That's all right. It's quite the entrance, but it's working. Oh, you got the cheap seats on the edge. I'm sorry. So the idea that it's more than just it's not the individual, it's not this idea of the romantic artist struggling alone, but rather that the individual is embedded within a system where they interact with the field of others, where they interact in order to get their works established into the culture. They need to pass gatekeepers in the field, and then the field of the domain of existing works, etc., informs the individual. So those things and I used to develop a bunch of curious agents. So this was one example of a curious assistant, which was this interactive evolutionary system, which John has done some of, quite a few, and critiques because people get fatigued just clicking on, selecting one of these and exploring the next one. And so I built an agent that would try and learn your preferences, but learn your preferences for novelty. And it could do a pretty good job if you're driven by sort of just exploring the space. It could do a pretty good job of predicting which one you were going to choose given a set of 9, because it was trying to model your preference for novelty, not your preference for aesthetics in general, more your journey than your destination. And another example is trying to build systems of agents, and this is that second diagram where we've got individuals communicating with others, sharing works, and forming one sort of illustrating Martindale's law of novelty, which is the idea that you have to innovate at the right rate to be established within the community, and the other that you get these cliques forming. So this is old work, but we the sort of next sort of thing when Petra and I started working together, she said, this is all very nice, but
but you're controlling the environment.
But it's way too easy.
Yeah, there's not enough mess in there.
It's not messy enough, nearly messy enough. So we have to build robots, which of course makes everything much, much harder. So this is one we built with Emma Chi, and this is called Curious Whispers, where we had little robots that would compose little tunes just with 3 notes and play them out so that each of them could hear. So they would listen to tunes and then they play them out again. And we gave people a box that would allow them to play the same 3 notes. And Stevia, were you around when Emma did this work? 2013. So you might have just been there. So the thing with them is that we were trying to play with their embodiment and what that could do for sort of easing the computational burden a little bit. So we built the robots with a little shell that would close so that they could actually lower the volume of their speaker, close the shell, and practice to themselves before then opening up and performing for the other robots, was the idea. But what got more interesting was what happened when you brought people in and gave them the little synthesizer thing and asked them to interact with them and how they behave. So we had people who would steal one of the robots, run off to another room, train it intensively on the tune it wanted it to learn, and then bring it back as a sort of an agent of chaos into the rest of the group. Or we got people who would who given no instructions would just be subservient to the robots and only learn what the robots were teaching them and not try and teach them anything. And also the social signaling got really interested as well. So the timing of when they close their hood and when they'd open up got interesting. So the interaction with the robots became really interesting. And that's kind of trying to build an embodied model of a little creative community where you're not in control, where you're part of the community, you're not just like driving everything. Another more recent exploration of a computational creative model with an embodied system, but this time virtual, was work I did in Lido, which is where I'm currently based, where we try to evolve a robot, and its feedback on the evolution is purely the marks that it's making, not like how it's moving, not necessarily how it's moving, but the marks it's making as it moves. And that was another sort of investigation of trying to evolve these sort of artificial systems. But Petra and I have been working on robotic installations as well. So trying to take some of these ideas and put them into galleries and more recently performances. And the first robotic work that we did was called Zwischenräume. I don't know when you want to jump in, but I'll talk about Zwischenräume and yeah. And with Zwischenräume, which I can't say as well as Petra, we started exploring this idea of building a robot that was in your environment. So this robot is hidden behind a wall, and we gave it a camera and a hammer. And it's exploring what it can do. And that's basically it. And we had two of these robots, which we built entirely the wrong way. There's learning as we go, made every mistake possible, I think. But and also we had to this robot is incredibly destructive once it gets going. So the opening, yeah.
Did they know what was on our side of the wall?
I'll show you some images from the robot's perspective in a moment. I'll talk about what's going on there.
Yeah.
But here's we actually did a few iterations of this. We don't have any sound. Sorry, we didn't have sound. Oh, hang on. Share the sound on Zoom. So I've got to go over here.
But you have to warn people to lower their.
Oh, lower the volume. Yeah, okay. On your, where do I do?
Can you see more?
Oh, under more. Okay. Wow, of course it's under more.
Share computer.
Share computer sound. Okay. All right. All right. Let's try that again. Take two. Maybe. So let's see. So I go back to here and then on the
Nathalio Vadevest has joined the meeting.
So a few iterations of our work. That was the first one and a hammer. Then we went to kind of and then we ended up at a coma in ended up with a punch, and it would punch the wall, which is kind of the design, although with a better punch, that we went on to for our next work, which Petra will talk about. But I'll just talk a little bit about the question of from the inside, what's the robot doing? And we're using the model of curiosity, that intrinsic motivation, like what's interesting model to drive the robot's behavior. So using the camera, it basically starts by, it's just trying to maximize that reward. So it explores the wall, the top row, which is kind of cut off here. It's just the robot just going around the wall and taking pictures of things that are interested on the back of the wall.
Plasterboard.
Now, most of the plasterboard is just the same color, but there's normally some writing that's been written on it. So it spends a lot of time on those. And then it starts experimenting with the hammer a little bit to see whether it can generate new and interesting shapes as well using the hammer.
Thank you.
It can a little bit. The only thing in the first version, this is from Session Runner, we were worried that it wouldn't pay attention to people. So we put in a face detection algorithm in it. So it's just like detect faces, very simple one. Mostly it's looking for colors.
Sarah Jane Pell to everyone. It looks like it found Putin.
I don't know what the computer's
We have
doing
some automated commentary as well there.
now. Okay. So we put in a little face detection, but the trouble with that was it would keep finding faces in the back of the wall once it started punching it. So it'd be like finding faces there. So we kept it in, but it would sort of just hang at the back of the wall sometimes. But ultimately, because once it breaks through the wall, once it can see through the wall, there's all these other colors, but it hasn't seen at the back of the wall. So then it actually spends time in the holes, actually looking and then looking at people. And it looks also at motion. So once it starts seeing people there, it starts watching the motion. So that's kind of like the performance of the curiosity. And that's like that's the thing that Petra and I have talked about, is like there's me wanting to program it, and also we need to perform it so people know. And that's why we put our cameras on little pan tilt units. It'd be much easier to put them on just a wide angle camera and just have it pointing straight forward. But with the pan tilt unit, you know it's looking at you. So it's kind of like part of the performance of it.
That's a question.
Oh yeah, sorry. No, because well, it doesn't make any difference. So they're not to, right? Because
They're
it
in
doesn't
the
make any
hole.
difference to the image. As long as people are moving, then they'll stay there. But if people stand still, or they basically there's no new colors there. So if you wanted to really get its attention, you wore a different color.
A participant has enabled closed captioning. Close. Who can see this transcript? Press CMD+ to open pop-up.
Is that a good thing? If you wore a different color from one you've seen before, it's paying a lot more attention to you because it's a new color. So essentially,
So when they have phone, you just keep moving and looking at.
it will watch people, but then eventually you'll get bored.
And
And then
goes
move on.
away and
So
knocks it
motivation
out.
is looking for difference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or novelty, that's the thing, it seeks novelty. Right?
Within a range. So there's kind of like again that wooden curve is kind of like has a sweet spot of like, this is similar but different from the things I've seen before. So those things are the things it will pay attention to. And then eventually, if it's too different and too new, it won't pay attention to it because it can't sort of integrate it into its very small memory. And if it's too similar, it will just move on because it's bored, for want of a better word, because it's not different enough. So it's not learning anything. And that's kind of like the model that underlies the curious agent stuff. So I was putting that into these robots to sort of drive this behavior, which gives them a nice sort of dynamic of spending. They'll go back to areas, they'll rework areas, they'll spend a bit of time interacting with people, but then also move on.
This one I have.
Yeah.
Want to talk about this?
This one, yeah, I'm talking about
Yeah.
this. If you don't
Yeah,
mind,
yeah,
but,
please.
it links nicely. But in the next work, I think what Rob also said about the how it plays in the next work actually uses more robots so that the wall becomes a playground for a group of robots. So they work on each other's.
Don Elvitigula has left the meeting.
Okay, great. Sorry, it's a presentation talking back. I try to be more interesting though. Yeah.
I don't know how
Nathalio Verdevest has left the meeting.
it's just telling us people leaving.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, I'll do that.
So this is just a very quick interlude because I think it links back nicely to this injection of randomness, because what we very quickly found out, and I think that really sparked our interest, was at first we had really this idea of, well, it was this idea of embedding these robotic or non-human agents in the human environment and having and transforming the human environment. But and that was our idea of this interplay. What if we basically an allegory of our already, of a human environment already handed over to other non-human agents, But then when we actually worked with plasterboard, which we hadn't done before, we very quickly realized that there's a whole different collaboration going on that we hadn't, that we hadn't planned on. So we could not control what the robots were actually doing, the way how they transformed and changed the integrity of the wall and these cultural things that happened. And so we got really interested in this notion of distributed agency effectively. And this is for me as an artist, so this talk is much more from Rob's lens. If this would be another talk, me talking through it as an artist and more from a feminist point of view. But as an artist, the interesting aspect is that we are this notion of injection of randomness is more an idea of we cannot control. We are collaborating with there's material collaborators, there's social, and much wider cultural collaborators and so forth. And this is this notion of, this is what looks perhaps like randomness, but this is why we don't have individual control over things. And yeah, so that then has really become the theme, I think, for our creative robotics work, this notion of distributed agency, human, non-human agency. This is working across these networks. Sorry. How do and so I'll just jump in and talk a bit more. So that was the next work that followed on Accomplice, where we wanted to work more with a group of robots, a troupe, as it were. Sorry, because I am worried about time. If I just start talking, then we can be until the evening. So I have to stick to notes a bit more than Rob. But yeah, so we switched. It was not a switch so much, but we expanded our attention to this notion of distributed creativity shared between the robots, but shared between the materials, and then of course also what's going on in the gallery, right? So there's these several layers of interaction that to some extent influences the behavior of the robots, but of course the behavior of the robots also influence the people, mostly by putting their hand into the wall, which we generally don't very much which we find a bit dangerous, but they always want to go. What we are offering you here is the view into what's going on behind the wall. We could ask for money from the people to know, because we don't show the robotic spectacle, right? This is the thing. We only show the material effect. So I think I've talked enough about this. Counselor. Better make and then the whole group of people at the bar who said that the other we wanted to do it. I was like, no, building it. They are collaborating. That's how it is always one of the big things is to instruct or train the people cleaning the gallery not to clean the floor, right? Because that's a very important part of the evolution of the work.
But it kind of starts as a sound piece because there's no holes.
Yeah.
And it finishes as much more of a visual, like kinetic, watching the robots move around. And as a sound piece, this was
Yeah,
this
that
was
the
our
best sound
favorite
piece.
because this was the biggest wall we've.
That was a
What?
36-meter wall, and yeah, you could hear that in the entire museum. This was a big museum. There was it was such a big drum, of course. And we do tend to run it like 1 or 2 days before the opening, so that there's tiny, just that there's, yeah, but it was mostly a massive drum. And then ideally, and we've been, that was installed, that was a very challenging install for us because it was installed for like 3 months or something like that. So they flew.
Teresa Lano Rodriguez has left the meeting.
Have you? And so locals usually tend to come back as well. I want to see how it evolves, right? So I think that was all. So we for the remainder, we will look at the machine movement lab. I started off, and then you talk a bit more about how your research interests come in. What was the starting point? Oh God, this project is so.
Nina Rajcic has left the meeting.
I have to say, it's starting to attack my self-confidence. I only hear about the people leaving. So this project started in 2015. We had then an ASC grant, and now have a future fellowship here in Melbourne. That's brought me to Melbourne. Still working on the project. The Machine Movement Lab is a long-term, larger scale project that looks at mostly movement, but the kinesthetic, empathy, the generativity of movement, really, its capacity to generate relationships, to generate meaning, to generate affect. This is what we're interested in movement for, and how we can use that to explore and expand and also trouble perhaps human-robot relationships, because at the moment we have a bit of a hierarchical relationship. This is actually perhaps the next slide. This is how we imagine, for the most part, our robotic future. And because there's this belief, of course, it's an overgeneralization, but in general, most of the funding is spent on humanoid robots, a bit like pet-like robots as well. And the idea is that, of course, we can easier communicate with them, we can easier understand them and easier relate to them. But there's, of course, this dark side on the other side, that we are manipulating people with highly superficial social cues, a total facade, a robot telling an elderly woman, I love you, that there's some issues with that. And so we are in a very computational creativity / practice-based artistic research approach. We're taking the very, very opposite side to that. And that's why I say very, because we don't have an aspiration to have robots that will be effectively working in the elderly care home or something in a few years from now, but to attack or to put forward this question of how can we, is there a possibility of relating to machines rather than human-like? Machines that look like humans, where the difference between humans and machines has been obscured to the extreme sometimes. What are the other venues there? And this is a more practice-based radical offers us this more radical perspective to effectively we work with the only rules that we set up at the beginning of the project was like non-organic structures, very simple machine-like structures. So we don't work with the imitation of nature, and yet can we use movement then to transform these geometric simple shapes into effective actors or performers effectively. That's again using creativity as well. And so we employ dancers since the beginning. I like the idea that we pay dancers through the Australia Research Council for research purposes, of course. And so we've asked dancers at the very beginning to enact a wide range. This is just a small selection here of materials and shapes. And we quickly found that actually the more expressive ones, they were reminding us too much of people inside shapes. So in the end, we selected two, that was the one you saw before. Maybe I want to quickly go back there. Go forward. Okay, Rob says go forward, go forward. But if I can.
Yeah.
So we then selected after a few months of trial, we selected the cubic shape because we knew how to build how to transform the movements that the dancers created with the shapes into a robotic mechanism, and the tetrahedron, which is still in process. But this basically just shows the snapshots of what we call the performative map mapping methodology. So the idea of asking dancers to activate these shapes is about a two-way material communication here. So the dancers learn to feel into these shapes and the relational affordances, the very non-human relational affordances, the way how to open up spaces or how to how to generate a relationship. And the limited, they often talk about the corners and the edges, as the limbs and so forth. So they map their bodies to these shapes, and then we motion capture these shapes to inform the machine learning. Not one-to-one to hand the data to the machine learner, but to see the machine learner with the biases and constraints, as Rob refers to them, of the dancers, because they're very specific. We could not, I hope you see it a bit later, it would be very difficult to program. These were our instructions to the dancers as well, that they do movements that we cannot program, or that are very difficult to program, right? The anti-vacuum cleaner, as it were. And here you see I have a bit of an overview. So this idea is to also shed the dualistic framings of subject, object, man, machine, that are built into our human-robot relationships at the moment, and to give over that comes more from I guess it's a new materialist feminist understanding, but what is notion of how we are deeply embedded and entangled in our world, so that we're not a top-down human-centered view of the world, and how we can, working with these more horizontal relations, how we can look at finding or seeking the creation of affect and meaning in these. So here maybe you see it from the other side. So that was in a study. That was a person who has never seen the robot before. So we invited people to encounter the robot, as it were. We also have exhibitions where there's a more unstructured encounter, but here we can ask people questions afterwards, and it's a very intimate scenario for them. It's very interesting how they mostly it's very interesting. People tend to go on high height with the robot, and what we also find very interesting is that so young children up to 4.5 years are completely freaked out, which I totally understand, because they're about in the size. They could actually be run over by the robot, and it's very interesting how our biology, they're completely freaked out. Also, their parents, nobody's allowed anywhere near the robot. And then it completely switches once the child hits 5-year-old. The parents can't get them out of the room. With they need to take the robot home. Basically, it's really interesting. This. So, and I hand over very classic. It becomes more technical to Rob, but Rob has become the robot whisperer over the years.
Yeah. So this is underneath the hood of the cube, and this is an early iteration of one of the robots, but the basics haven't changed, in that we have two mechanical main components, and that is, we've got an omnidirectional base made up of 3 wheels that can turn, so omnidirectional wheels. So that's sometimes called a Kiwi drive. So an important part of the movement of the robot is it can move off in any direction without having to turn, which is a very sort of machinic kind of being able to move. And on top of that, we have what's often referred to as a Stewart-Goff platform, which is 6 linear actuators arranged into two triangles essentially offset from each other, and that can do roll, pitch your up and down, left and right to a certain extent, with a lot more fidelity sort of than the wheel. So the question from a control perspective is how to combine the abilities of these two systems to make convincing movements. So that's kind of the challenge we have. Like I think we have 9 degrees of freedom here from the components, but we're overlapping. So for instance, the turning we can do either with the top or with the bottom, but the top can only turn a certain amount, but it can turn faster than the wheels can turn, etc., etc. So there's an interesting problem in terms of the control structure, and that's one of the challenges for the machine learner. And what I'm particularly interested in, or part of that process, is that we have the dancer provide us with material, so training data that we use to train the robot. Then the robot learns how to move and learns with that training data and produces new performances, which then inform the dancers again. So this isn't a linear, we just take data from dancers and train the robot and it performs, but rather that this all links all the way back to informing the dancer's movements. And importantly, what we're really interested in is for the robot not just to learn the movements that are provided, but essentially to learn from the ground up how to move and then use the movements from the performers to inform which movements it favors. So to bias the movements that it's using, but we're not we're only capturing the top level movement, and we can drive the robot with a fixed controller, or we can drive the robot with a machine learned controller. And in exhibitions and stuff where we need to know exactly what it's going to do, tend to use the fixed controller, but the research is about trying to use the machine learned controller. So obviously we work in simulation, and what we're working with is we've got our captured data. So this is captured using a Vive tracker. We also have a OptiTrack system that we're using now for much higher fidelity captures. We take that through various bits of software for cleaning up the data, and we also in simulation we use a quality diversity model to try and learn good sort of repertoires of movements, and then use a variational autoencoder to encode the movements and then to map that into the space of the quality diversity archive, which I'm happy to talk about anyone who wants to get into the nitty-gritty, to generate essentially a repertoire of movements that it can draw upon to then try and produce things like those that we've recorded. So it's a sort of different way of working. But in order to work with that data set, of course, the dirty secret of all machine learning is that we need the data and we need to clean it up, and it's often a lot of labor involved there. And so we build various tools. This is the one that I've been working on recently, which is a lot about trying to work with the data and doing frequency analysis on the movement in the same way we would with sound, to try and isolate certain components of the movement, and also to fix data. So in fact, this recording had a problem that the Vive tracker was wobbling, so we can actually find it in the frequency and then eliminate that fairly easily.
But it's also about generating that.
But it also is for generating data, so we can take different frequencies from the movement and isolate them, and then have them as movements in and of themselves, along with sort of traditional data augmentation techniques, because we can't capture enough data effectively for a machine learner. It's a ravenous beast that is never satisfied. So we use all the sort of traditional data augmentation using affine transforms, but also combining together movements to produce different variations. So we ask the dancers to do different variations of movements, and then we have recently also developed a tool which Petra is using to choreograph longer sequences and to blend movements together so that we can generate new data sets for our machine learner to work on.
This is
And
the Unity game engine. Yeah.
yeah, so this one is developed in was developed in
Unity editor.
Unity, and Petra's been working with this, and it gives her a lot of fine control over how to put those movements together. Then we put it through some of my tools to sanitize it afterwards, make sure we haven't got any wobbles introduced, those sorts of things, and then we sort of hand it over to either to the robot to perform or to the machine learner as additional data to work with. So I hand back over to Petra to finish
Already.
stuff. Yeah.
So that's also an example of how the loop is closed again. So we now, as part of my fellowship, we've got into using performance making as an immersive low fidelity prototyping tool for not so much, we don't want to generate human robot relationships, but we want to explore the possibilities there as such, right? Because the idea is that they generate themselves. We believe in emerging relationships rather than pre-designed ones, pre-formulated ones. But once they emerge, how can we attend? So in a way, working with performance makers, choreographers, and dancers, scenography, and so forth, that these tools provide us lenses to attend to the various attunements that emerge. We're really interested in this, I think, as the images speak of as well, these tight entanglements and what sort of affects they can produce. Of course, again, this is, as I said, in the sort of radical practice-based research making range, rather than we don't expect LLMs to, this is not how we expect them to relate to their machines, but we hope that this will help us to, on the one hand, generate, of course, movement languages for non-human like robots, but also it's also in my mind it's also a cultural objective. We have been indoctrinated in the robots with faces on it. I think we need to. It would be interesting, and it will be important to look at alternative futures, so that technology doesn't always pretend to have a human face. And so to have and as part of this practice, of course, one of our outputs is actual performances, and we call dancing with the non-human. This was the first iteration of performances in Sydney last year at the She Robots exhibition at the University of Sydney, and the idea there is, so it's on the one hand a classic outreach. We share our research with the audiences, but it's also it has proven really important for us to invite the diverse embodied experiences of audiences into our research, right? Because otherwise it's just the team or whatever, how many we collaborated with, like 12, 14 dancers or something, but we want to, of course, look at a much more diverse range of embodied empathy and how these things feel, what sort of affects are generated. Sorry? Yes, sorry. This is thank you. This is a very as part of, so the final slide is following this one. It's just a brief edit of inviting you into a very brief virtual edit of the performance, but in general, very shyly, I want to say we are always interested to bring people to the studio as well. So at the moment we're working in Peran. It's very helpful to have but just people from the outside, just literally hanging with us, rolling on the floor. It can be anything. We have a big dance studio there, but any sort of proximities that people find comfortable. But this is very interesting. So I would like an open invitation. Maybe I can put it on the socials when we have workshops. So in a kind of casual, but it's really important at this stage to render the process more porous, right? To bring people in. I don't have a photo of the kids workshops. We do kids workshops as well. Didn't bring any photos, I'm sorry.
So with the kids workshops, we bring a whole load of cardboard boxes and a whole load of craft materials, and we get them to design their own robot or cube robot, or box robots.
Box robot, we
They
call
design
them.
their own box robot and then tell us about their box robot and what their special moves are, and what they want the robot to be able to do. Mostly their homework.
Yes.
Um,
Send the robot to school.
Well, they send the robot to school. That's right. And sometimes and they sort of perform their robot as well. And that's workshops that we've been running for a few years now, and hope to run another one next year. So that'll be another thing to announce.
Yeah, exactly. And we hope to get to do some event like this here in Melbourne as well. The next one that I want to organize is an intergenerational one, so with kids and their grandparents, because I'm really interested in speaking of diversity of bodies, and also how something feels. And of course, with kids, which I also find really interesting, is goes a bit more into the narrative. So there, with the dancers, we evolve. There's imagery involved, and we work with sometimes with words and so forth, but it's relatively abstract because we actually want to deliberately avoid to go too much into the human world, right? We don't want to create a sad robot or a happy robot, because all of this is then you meet, even though having said that, there's no problem if the people experience it as sad or happy, right? There's of course no regulations in how we perceive the robot, but we don't want to re-inscribe them already with specific human-like emotions. While kids are on a different, they get googly eyes, they get to have tails, it can be anything. It's much more on the because we don't want to restrict them, the imagination, and it's much more about role playing them. But we put them in couples, and we thought it would be really interesting to put them in couples also with their grandparents, but one of them gets to perform the robot. They work with the dancers to figure out what the behaviors of the box robot are, and then and interact with their friend or hopefully then their grandparent. So, and on a more abstract level though, a quick insight into our performance, I think, at the final. So I might maybe quickly, it is an entire improvisational performance. Was the second one, where there's actually a bunch of kids in this game because we had a box robot workshop afterwards. It was really great, absolute great fun. Race to the gallery with like 50 people. And the performance is, I do think, fairly abstract, but it is designed on a longer journey. So it starts out here with a kind of riddle where the dancers perform movements that the cube of so that they wouldn't have performed during the cube costume. And then, so this is just the performance is about 30 minutes long, so this is a very quick edit. This is the next stage where we talk about the threshold. And these are experiments that we do in the studio, and then we thought about how can we bring our new experiments from the studio into a performance. But this is experimented a lot with this idea of the hybrid, where it's a bit more we think of the costume as like the crab, hermit crab. So, while this one is a different kind of environment, that the dancers are completely inside the cube, and we see it's interesting because that's the only thing in the performance that completely integrates the robot. If you just look at the cube, but it's quick, I can't very quick. And this is the final stage performance. It's called co-play. So that's the only given structure, and then everybody provided in that. That's where the boxes become kind of where it's all about play with boxes again, but the boxes don't play themselves. But we're losing the trying to or habits that have established themselves. us, it's broken leg, basically for the broken leg. I mean, one of the actuators. At the same day, got COVID, so was no longer allowed at the university. Those were the rules then. Not with masks, they would have put him in an astronaut suit, but no, it was no longer allowed. So I had to run all the rehearsals and the robot and everything on my own. So in order to avoid any other accidents, because I could not have dealt with that, to be honest, 2 days before the performance. It was decided to take on robot. Otherwise, also for the robot. But it's a bit frustrating for us to watch. Okay, that was it, I think. Yeah, we just have to say.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for your attention.
So I'm just going to stay back here so everyone can hear me on the Zoom, but we have time quickly if anyone has any questions. If you're on the Zoom and you'd like to ask a question, could you just post it in the chat? But if anyone in the live audience has a question, now's the time.
Wondered whether in the wall or vision and the scanning of the wall was input to guide action. I wonder in the robots whether you added inputs, whether motion sensors, or sound or visual. You have this catalog of movements, but then what inputs influence movements?
Yeah, we've had a version of the robot where we've had cameras in the space, so that the robot can basically changes its interaction patterns based on
mostly distance and
distance,
speed of.
Florian Floyd Mueller has left the meeting.
So I really want to turn the sound off on this machine.
Yeah.
Hold on. There we go. So we've had cameras in the space, and we have some sensors on the robot for safety. Just distance sensors to just be safe. And we're actually working now on how best to kind of fuse sensor data in with the movements. And one of the ideas that I'm working on is to get the robots to be thinking, sorry, my apologies. Get the robot to work with movement more in the sense of forces that it's applying over time, because that's how the dancers
we work a lot
think.
with contact
They
info.
actually work with thinking about forces and how the forces are applying and imagery of forces. So if we can actually get the robot to be modeling its movement more in terms of the forces that it's applying, and then use ideas which I've used before in some models of like social forces. So the perception of a person produces an invisible force that will then constrain movement, rather than having it be a reaction to a sensed input on a sort of, if sensed input, then do something different, but much more applying it on a sort of force base. So a bit like, a flocking model would use it, those sorts of things, just as a way of being able to do that integration and that fusion in a very simple sort of cohesive way, and also inspired by how the dancers talk about movement. And it just feels like that's a language we can all share. And if I can get the robot actually building movement around that same sort of language around forces, then it'll be an interesting development. So that's the plan. But yes, we have lots of sensors that we actually plan to add. And then sound is an area that Petra's very interested in, both generating from the robot, so that the soundscapes are generated by the thinking about the robot as sort of an instrument that's playing.
Generate sound.
About sound of the cues and morphizing of a geometric shape. It's very logical for humans to do that. Sure. Is full of shapes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Think of us, and we emote.
One of the first robots we wanted to build was a sphere, and then Force Awakening comes out, and we decide that no, we're not going to do that one. And then I don't know, and then Andor comes out recently, and it's got a cube robot. So
But we were first
know,
there, at least, because you can't compete with Star Wars, as you might imagine.
no, the sounds the sounds there are very much obviously trying to the mechanical sounds, sort of heightened mechanical sounds, which would definitely be an interesting thing to play with. But our robot makes relatively little noise apart from the clicking of the wheels on the floor and that sort of stuff. But it doesn't have a lot of like servo actuator kind of sounds coming out of it naturally. So thinking about how it can generate and react to sounds is definitely
also for the interaction with people, because we want to increasingly move it to a more open model where we involve more non-expert people, and we find sound is an easy, because asking an adult, non-trained adult, to entangle with the cube is it's also maybe privately. We have seen actually quite brave adults, but especially not while there's other people in the room and so forth, but playing with an instrument when you like move it and you go like, oh, that's an easy entry position. And it's also, we also used very effectively sound generation to synchronize dancers, because they were, sometimes we want to, as part of the performance making, we played with this notion of synchrony and async, this coming together and falling apart again as a, and while they're in the cube, it's very difficult. They have a very limited understanding of the, especially when you synchronize in terms of speed and very fine detail. But we found that when the cubes can just with the accelerometer, right, make sounds based on how they move, they can, it's insane. It's like they're basically synchronized metal, like Olympic swimmers or something in the studio. It's like what that is. It's as if they had to adjust through the sound. It's amazing. Also, I mean, of course, they're trained with that, but that also helps us with. It's not helps, but to study these other effects of how does movement ripple through a group of robots. In the last workshop we did, we had like 6 of these cubes in the studio, so we were moving increasingly into a cube world that we as humans entered. That's the, and sound is so. Also, I might ping you there, John. Anyway, I'm really interested in collaborate with I tried to find somebody who's comfortable with interactive sound generation, but abstract sound generation. It'd be really exciting to collaborate. I mean, of course, if there's anybody in the room, sorry, then you have to go through John apparently. No, it's but that is the next step that I would be very keen to look at.
all right. So
Bye bye.
All right, I think we've run out of time. But
Yeah.
just please join me again in thanking Robotic Future.
Thank
thanks
you.
so much, guys.
Hope we didn't talk too long. We talked more than half hour, did we?
And
Thank you to everyone online for listening in to.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.